Well, a warm welcome to today's talk. Now, there's been a report from the Oireachtas, the Irish Parliament, and the President on vitamin D, and it's a very thorough report, and I'm really pleased to see it. I really welcome it because it's in agreement with a lot of the research that we have been discussing for over a year now on this channel. So let's look at it. And I particularly like it because it's completely accessible. It's not written in jargonese. Anyone can read it, and it's fine. So this is the report directly from the Oireachtas, as we've said, Joint Committee on Health. So open, transparent, accessible, clear report there from the chair. And all the members are there, completely transparent, clear, open process. I wish all processes were as clear and open as this in international health. Now let's get straight down to the detail. That's a pre-say there. That's that site I've just been on there with the information on it. So let's have a look at what it's saying. Now I'll just read you out briefly the introduction because it really summarises things quite nicely. The committee heard evidence that vitamin D deficiency is prevalent across the population, this is of Ireland, and report recommendations that public health measures are established to address that deficiency. These public health measures are preventative in nature and are recommended to reduce the risk of respiratory and other illnesses such as osteoporosis. So they're talking about Ireland, of course, but we know that this applies to a lot of other places as well. Now, let's go straight on to the fourth. Now, I'm going to go into a bit of detail on this. As I say, nothing taxing. It's all common sense, research-based stuff. But if you're short of time, I'm just going to give you the main recommendations. So here's the main recommendations. That daily vitamin D supplementation of 20 to 25 micrograms, and of course 25 micrograms is 1,000 international units. So that equals 1,000 international units. It really is inconvenient that there's two different forms used. So 25 micrograms, 1,000 international units, same thing. Anyway, supplements of 20 to 25 micrograms a day should be recommended to the entire adult population as a public health measure. Direct quote from the paper, the first point. But they go on, higher doses recommended for vulnerable groups under medical supervision. So they point out, for example, the elderly, people with a high body mass index will probably need additional higher dose. So really here what they're doing is recommending that Irish doctors consider this, and that for everyone, considering prescribing a much higher dose in some circumstances for people at increased risk. Point 2, second main recommendation, that a public health policy which promotes better knowledge of the benefits of vitamin D and encourages vitamin D supplementation should be developed in time for consideration of the budget for 2022. Now, fortunately, vitamin D is pretty cheap, so I don't anticipate that being a problem. But thinking about that, the Irish is saying that reducing the cost of vitamin D supplementation in order to promote its uptake should be considered. Now, I mean, I must say it is pretty cheap anyway. I mean, what's this one? I mean, this one's 25 micrograms, 60 tablets, and I think it was about £2 or £3 English pounds. I mean, vitamin D is inexpensive. But they're going to make it cheaper, which of course is brilliant. That specific measures need to be put in place for vulnerable groups and frontline healthcare workers, who of course, as a frontline healthcare worker, you're exposed to every organism, virus, bacteria going because you're working with poorly people. So excellent if frontline healthcare workers have additional protection or they optimise their immune system. So that vitamin D supplementation is administered on an opt-out basis. So what they're saying here is vulnerable groups and frontline healthcare workers should be taking vitamin D supplement by default. and vitamin D supplementation is administered on an opt-out basis if they need to opt out. And for the duration of this pandemic, people should be offered vitamin D supplements when presenting at COVID-19 testing centres. So, clear indication there that they are thinking that vitamin D is going to be protective in COVID-19. Now, we know it takes about a week to convert the vitamin D into the active form, but I still like this. That's what they're doing. So that is the position in, that's the report in Ireland now. So they're the main recommendations if you're short of time, but do stick around. This is really, it's so encouraging to see a national government take this sort of proactive action at doses which are reasonable, with recommendations for higher doses for at-risk groups. Now, but let's go on. Why vitamin D is important? Well, again, this is directly from the report. And the report is also well referenced. Now, I'm limited to how much information I can put in the comment section on YouTube. You can only put in so many words, but I will be putting in as many references as I can. But all the references are on the report. If you go into the report, you'll see the references. You can click on the references from the report. So, assisting in muscle strength, good. Inadequate levels of vitamin D associated with. Now, we know about bone disorders and flexible bones in young people, so that's fairly well known. But these are in addition to that. So, metabolic disorders, autoimmune conditions, psychiatric disorders, respiratory disorders, cardiovascular disorders, and cancers. So inadequate vitamin D levels are associated with all of these, according to this report. And we have looked at research for all of these ourselves. So this is really reassuring confirmation. They quote data from the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging. Now, I'm not going to put all the references in here, but this largely comes from this report here. Vitamin D deficiency is associated with increased likelihood of incidence of depression in older adults. So that's on that one. So, as I say, I'm not going to give all the references. They are on the report. So, but over the age of 50, 75% more likely to experience depression if their vitamin D levels are low. So, this is just huge. So, people over the age of 50 are 75% more likely to experience depression if their vitamin D levels are low. 75% more likely. This is huge. Depression is a horrible, wretched condition. And I know it's anecdotal evidence. Well, it's not evidence, it's anecdotes. But so many people have written in and put on the comments that they feel better now they're taking vitamin D supplements. But that's what the data from the Irish work is showing. 75% more likely to experience depression. It really is a big factor. And of course, we've known about the seasonal affective disorders for a long time as well. Increases the likelihood of developing depression in later life. So deficiency of vitamin D increases the likelihood of depression in later life. And this is really quite common, and it's a horrible condition. High prevalence of vitamin D deficiency amongst our older population. So there's a lot of deficiency, therefore they are going to be prone to this increased likelihood of depression. And depression affects functional status and longevity. So here they're saying depression can actually mean that someone dies at a younger age, and functional status. If you're depressed, you're just not functional. I've had periods of depression, many of you have had periods of depression, and you just can't do things if you're in a depressed state, is what they're saying. Supplementation has a low risk of toxicity, according to the Irish study. Right, in the context of COVID-19, vitamin D is known to assist the immune system in fighting harmful bacteria and viruses. Now, notice the language here. Vitamin D is known to assist. This report says they know this. Reduces the risk of acute respiratory infections, ARI. Evidence that it reduces the risk of acute respiratory infections. So vitamin D adequacy reduces the risk of respiratory infections. Evidence from major international studies, these papers here, the Jolliffe papers, again, all referenced. These say 25% reduction in the risk of respiratory infections in those taking daily vitamin D supplements. So in the context of the Irish population, which is a fairly, well, this is international actually, but the Irish population is representative. 25% reduction in reducing the risk of respiratory infections of those taking vitamin D supplements. I am happy to accept a 25% reduction in my risk of respiratory infections, to be quite honest. Right, now this is interesting as well, and we have mentioned this several times. You might have listened to the discussion with Professor Spector. I was talking about the Bradford Hill criteria. I only got time to do one of them, which was strength. But the Bradford Hill criteria allow you to not prove but infer causation from associations. So the evidence from existing studies meets the Bradford Hill criteria for causality. Now this is from this paper by Austin Bradford Hill, published way back in 1965 when they didn't have the internet, of course, but it is now on the internet. You can actually read the full original paper. So Richard Doll and Austin Bradford Hill, famous epidemiologists, and they discovered a little link between smoking and mortality in relation to smoking. 10 years observational studies of British doctors, the British doctor studies. So what Richard Doll and Austin Bradford Hill actually did was they used these methodologies to work out, firstly, that smoking cigarettes cause lung cancer. That was the first thing they worked out. Then they worked out that cigarette smoking was a major factor in ischemic heart disease and caused atherosclerosis, furring up of the coronary arteries. Great epidemiologists. And of course, they put forward this idea that smoking was harmful, but there was vested interest in smoking. People were making a lot of money out of it. So it wasn't admitted for a long period of time, and they had a long, prolonged battle because financial interests were taking precedent over health interests. And interestingly, my brother was working on a paper or a letter from Richard Doll where, I can't remember quite when it was now, but it was back in the 60s, I think, when he, I think it was early 60s, when he identified the risk of asbestos. Unfortunately, my brother didn't survive to complete his research, but Richard Doll was warning about the risk of asbestos and mesothelioma back in the early 60s. And again, that wasn't acted on. It was almost as if people were putting commercial interests more importantly than people's lives. Let's hope no one today is putting commercial interests above people's lives. Let's hope that is the case. I'm not sure, but we can hope it is. Right. So I'm just putting these down as the credibility of the people that are talking here. Strongly supports the causal relationship between low vitamin D status and increased risk of severity of COVID-19 disease. So they are satisfied that the Bradford Hill criteria are met, and this strongly supports a causal relationship. In other words, they're postulating here strongly that it's the low vitamin D levels that causes the increased severity of COVID-19. This is what this Irish study is suggesting. More than suggesting, it's strongly supported. Right, irrespective of COVID-19, they say, vitamin D supplementation is an essential public health measure required to address the widespread deficiency noted across the Irish population. Significant adverse health effects, significantly adverse health effects of this deficiency. So the significant adverse health effects because of the deficiency. Now, the next one they talk about is probably fairly obvious. Ireland is an intensely green and beautiful country because of its oceanic climate. lack of sun in Ireland, and this is what the report says, especially from late autumn to mid-spring. Longer working hours indoors. Those in nursing homes spend considerable periods indoors. Who died most from this pandemic? Highest death rates were in care facilities. Lockdown reduced outdoor exposure still further. Professor John Fall, direct quote in the report, "For this reason alone we should be increasing the supplementation." Purely because of lockdown. So there was shortages already, and of course lockdown, people not getting out as much, made it worse. So advocating supplementation for that reason. Professor Roseanne Kenny, we do not get it in Ireland from sunshine, vitamin D. We do not get it in Ireland from sunshine at this time of the year, or indeed during most of the spring and some of the autumn. In other words, it's only summertime you get enough vitamin D in Ireland. Basically, it's the same in where I am in England. The sun needs to be 45 degrees in the sky, so that the ultraviolet B radiation gets through, so your skin can synthesize the vitamin D. And of course, it doesn't happen. This message needs to get out there, says the professor. Right, now why is the professor saying this? Direct quote. "I say this because I have heard scientists speaking on radio saying there is no need to supplement because people get sufficient from food and sunshine in Ireland. This is very incorrect and it needs to be said." This is very incorrect. In other words, they're not getting enough from the sun and they're not getting enough from their diet in the Ireland situation. So where does the vitamin D come from in the Irish diet? Well, fortified milk, super milk and cereal. So there is some fortification in Ireland. I don't think there's much fortification in the UK, certainly not in milk that I'm aware of. And they talk about oily fish, which is good. Oily fish is a good source of vitamin D, but farmed salmon not so good. And of course, the salmon you get now is all farmed. The poor things live their whole lives in these pens in the sea, and they're often fed on not a sort of seafood diet. I think they're fed largely on soya, and of course that affects the nutrients that actually end up in the fish tissues. So farmed salmon has less than a third of the vitamin D content compared to wild salmon. So basically, it's very, very hard to get vitamin D from the diet in a modern environment, unless you can afford to eat lots of oily fish and things like that. Therefore, the only way for the Irish population to get sufficient level of vitamin D is through the regular use of vitamin D supplements. Again, direct quote. If it's in italics, it's a direct quote. The only way the Irish can get enough is through vitamin D supplements. Now, I mean, obviously, if you're a builder and you're working outside, you can take your shirt off, or if you're at the allotment for summertime, you can make a lot in summertime. But then autumn and winter you're going to make virtually none, and it's going to run low. That's what they're saying. Right, safety of vitamin D supplementation is addressed by the committee. There's a consensus. They reference the European Food Safety Authority, Scientific Institute of Medicine from the US. So that's the UK group. So basically, the support, they're putting references from international countries. There's consensus about the safety of vitamin D supplementation. Oral vitamin D intakes below 100 micrograms per day. So remember, that's 100 micrograms is, as they say, 4,000 international units. Are safe for adults and do not pose a risk to humans. So basically they're saying you can take up to 4,000 international units a day, and according to this report there is consensus that that is safe. That is what this report is saying. Food Safety Authorities of Ireland endorse the upper intake threshold of 100 micrograms. Right. So the Food Safety Authority of Ireland is in agreement that 100 micrograms a day should be the upper limit, but is safe, is what they're saying. There is consensus about this. So they're saying up to 100 micrograms a day, which is 4,000 international units a day for adults. And they say that that can be suitable for children over the age of 11. And of course, younger children also need vitamin D, albeit at a proportionately lower level. Right, Irish population deficiency levels. Do you know geo-mapping vitamin D status in a large city? So that's I've just put another reference in there. That's that one there. But this is where the report, and this is agreed to by the report. Now this is interesting. Deficiency, according to them, is less than 50 nanomoles of the active form of the vitamin D in the blood. Less than 50 nanomoles a litre. Now, that is exactly the same as 20 nanograms per mil. So we tend to use that unit in the UK and Europe. We tend to use those units in the United States. But it's exactly the same. So all you do to convert that nanograms per mil into nanomoles per litre is you multiply it by 2.5. That's the conversion. So that and that are exactly the same, and they say deficiency is less than 50 nanomoles or less than 20 nanograms per mil. So again, very clearly defined in this very transparent report, clear definition. You might not agree 100% with that, but that's what they're saying. It's clear, it's easy to understand. So, and I am more than happy with those definitions. Now, using those definitions, who is deficient? In Ireland, 47% of 18 to 39-year-olds, nearly half of them. 18 to 39, young adults, 47% deficient of vitamin D. 50 to 59-year-olds, 35 deficient. Over 80s, 64% deficient. And in nursing home residents, greater than 67% are deficient of vitamin D. And wait for this, 93% of dark-skinned, I can't remember what it stands for actually, black and minority ethnic groups, I think. Who's died most in the United States, for example, in this pandemic? Those with darker skins that make vitamin D much more slowly. Deficiency, 93% in Ireland. The death rate in BAME communities in the UK has been terribly high. But in Ireland, we know that 93% in the BAME community are deficient of vitamin D. I don't think anyone's bothered to find out in England. Not as far. I haven't seen any large-scale studies on it. I don't think we've bothered. But the Irish have. Impressive. Excellent work. Obesity is another risk factor. So age and increase in risk factor, dark coloured skin a risk factor. Obesity, 60% of the population of Ireland are overweight. Dear me. I don't think we're any better in the UK or the United States. That results in vitamin D deficiency requiring higher oral doses of vitamin D. So again, they would require higher doses of vitamin D. Now, I've gone on for quite some time, so I'm going to leave that there. We will come back and talk about this report again because there's quite a bit more to look at. So it's all there, well worth a read. It's completely accessible. You can read through it in about a couple of hours, but I skim through it in an hour. It's all there. This is what we've talked about. That's the proportion there, vitamin D in Ireland that we've just looked at. Gives some nice graphics. Year-round vitamin D status in Irish adults. Do look at it for yourself. Well worth looking at. Increase in the older population. Increased in obesity. Increased in the BAME community. And next time we'll look at... that's international approaches to vitamin D deficiency. No, we haven't done that yet. So they talk about Finland and they talk about Spain and all sorts of interesting things. But That's enough for that one. We'll put that one up to be going on with. Hope that helps. If this is what the evidence is showing, this is what we need to follow. And it looks like the Irish government are going to implement all of this. And I just love this transparent report. You know, everyone is there. It's all clear. There's accountability. There's governance. You know, we need accountability and governance in our national and international organisations, and the Irish government seems to be leading the way. Let's hope others follow. But anyway, that's very reassuring about vitamin D. And from an alternative perspective, do listen to the discussion I had with Tim Spector. But I believe I've presented quite a lot of evidence there, and we'll put a lot more references in the comments section. Follow the evidence wherever it leads. Thank you, of course, very much for watching, and I hope this was helpful.